On behalf of the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, I'd like to welcome you all to yet another event organized by FEPS, this time in cooperation with two very important partners of ours, the Fondazione Gramsci and Policy Solution, with whom we have recently published two publications, the book Changing Political Discourse in the Aftermath of the 2008 Crisis, the case of Italy, and the Populism Tracker with Policy Solution. And these two publications offer us the opportunity to discuss today with you and with a group of really outstanding speakers the state and resilience of our European democracies and progressive parties in the face of the continuous challenge posed by extremist and populist parties. In the book on the changing political discourse in particular, together with our partners from Fondazione Gramsci, we took the paradigmatic case of Italy to observe the radical transformations that have occurred in the language of politics in the last decade. We look at the increasing fragmentation and simplification of the political ideas and proposals, at the growing informality and aggressiveness of the political language and communication, as well as the use of new communication channels to disseminate political ideas and build consensus. The case of Italy was used as an example to describe transformations that are in fact taking place in one way or the other in all European countries and in many European parties, including mainstream parties. I would like to thank here our friends at the Fondazione Gramsci for their fantastic cooperation. And I would like to thank Giacomo Bottos, Eleonora Desiata, and Andrea Pareschi, the three researchers that carry out this study, for their work and enthusiasm. Before leaving the floor to my colleague Maria, who will tell you a bit more about the Populism Tracker, I wish you all a fruitful debate, and I invite you to actively engage in the debate by using all the tools that this platform and Facebook provide us. Thank you very much. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Heidi, and hello everybody joining us back home. My name is Maria Freitas, I'm FEPS Senior Policy Advisor, and today I'll be co-sharing this exciting discussion together with Heidi Giusto. And as Heidi had the opportunity to convey, for us is also a very exciting occasion for FEPS, not only because we have launched our publication with Fondazione Gramsci, but also because FEPS has now also, after 5 years, tracked the popularity of most populist parties in Europe together with Policy Solutions, our Hungarian-based member foundation. So also here, on behalf of FEPS, a big thanks to Policy Solutions for their readiness and engagement, and Tamas in particular, to track the rise in support of populist parties all over Europe. And in fact, the results of this 5-year project, our participants can very easily find online by looking at the website Progressive Post, and there you will be able to find the Populism Tracker website. Over there, you will be able to see the populism map, see the rise in popularity or the decrease in popularity of over 70 parties in the European Union. And most importantly, also have a look at the latest publications that FEPS and Policy Solutions have brought about in this very exciting topic. And as Heidi also had the opportunity to convey, this is the opportunity also for our participants to engage with our panelists. And so therefore, we invite you to chat with us in the Zoom chat box. Our colleagues Celine and Elena are there looking for you, for your questions. We're here to engage with you and to take up your questions to our speakers. So also there, if you have any question that you would like to address to a specific speaker, make sure to state that. And additionally, we will also like to invite you to follow FEPS Europe on Twitter, so FEPS_Europe, and by engaging in the discussion by using the hashtag populism. So this is a bit the setting the scene, let's say, by Heidi and myself, and also a bit of highlights with regards to how we wish to engage with you. And don't forget, we're also on Facebook Live, and so there we will also be collecting your questions. Heidi, back to you.
Thank you very much, Maria. So to the audience, you have to get used to see alternately my face and Maria's face. And Maria's actually reminding me to tell you that you can find also the other book, the one published with Fondazione Gramsci on FEPS website for free for downloading. Now allow me to introduce the first speaker of today. As I said before, we have a very interesting group of speakers today. And our first speaker is Professor Daphne Halikiopoulou. I hope I pronounce it correctly. I made exercise before. Daphne teaches comparative politics at the University of Reading, and her work focuses mainly on radical nationalism. So before entering into a more detailed description of the two publications of today, descriptions that will be made by Tamas and by Michele, we would like Daphne to illustrate her views on the challenge that the rise of populist party pose to political mainstream parties and the implication that this current trend entail for the future of the European Union. Before giving the floor to Daphne, I would like to tell you that there will be a short space for question and answers at the end of these first three speakers' speeches. Daphne, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic pronunciation, so excellent. And hello, everyone. And thank you very much to FEPS and to partners for inviting me here. I know this is an important event today, and I'm quite excited to be here. I've been asked to talk specifically about the challenges that populism poses to the mainstream and to the future of Europe. And so I have 10 minutes to do this today. So what I will do is I will focus on 3 points. I want to make 2 points about populism, about what it is and about what we can attribute to the causes of its rise. And then lastly, I want to focus on the consequences, or in other words, the challenges that populism poses. I don't have any slides because it's a very short talk, but everything I say is based on my research. So you're very welcome to expand during the Q&A or get in touch afterwards. So the first point that I would like to make is about variation. If you look at the really excellent Populism Tracker that FEPS has done, you will see that one striking thing is that there is variation in popularity across Europe. And this is consistent with what we can see if we try to track the rise of these parties basically in the past 20, 30 years. So some rise, decline, there is variation across time and also variation across country. Recently, you will see, for example, these parties declined in Austria and Bulgaria, Denmark and Greece, whereas they increased in Belgium and Finland and France. Why is this? I think this is important. This is not just a theoretical point. It's important because it shows us that populism is neither uniform nor linear. It is often used as an umbrella term to basically describe a series of parties that what they have in common, that share in common this narrative that divides between us, the people, and the corrupt elites. But beyond that, it really includes a variety of very different parties. And this is actually what accounts for the variation. And I'm not simply talking here about the difference between the left and the right-wing variety, which is quite obvious, but even within the far-right category, that is what I'm more interested in myself, is what most of my research is. If I can take you away from Europe for 1 second, for example, and we go to the US, Donald Trump has been described as populist. So have a series of far-right European parties, for example, as I said, in Austria and France, etc. But these are two very different things, right? So Trump is the leader of, at the end of the day, one of the 2 mainstream parties in the US, whereas in Europe, we're talking in many cases about very small parties that have increased the vote share quite significantly. So the dynamics of the political system are very different. And therefore, these parties are players in very different systems. Now, why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you all this because when we have very different parties, when we're looking at very different parties, that means that maybe the causes of their electoral support are also very different. So I think it's very tricky to attribute one cause that explains why we're witnessing this phenomenon. So I think taking into account variation is very important. Another thing is also, is populism itself the most important aspect of these parties? So it is a descriptor for sure, but is it what defines them? Maybe we should also be looking at their nationalism, authoritarianism, far-right agenda. Maybe that is actually what explains their rise. So to move swiftly to my second point is about their support, specifically the economic determinants of their support. And here I want to focus a bit on far-right populism in particular. So the conventional wisdom, at least in academia, tends to be that the rise of these parties is somehow related to an increase in cultural insecurity. So it's a cultural backlash closely associated to immigration. And I do want to point out that I think that this view neglects the economic determinants of far-right party support, both the fact that economic deprivation is not just a question of only the lowest strata, but it's also a relative deprivation issue. So anyone who might consider themselves insecure or vulnerable, or just simply by comparing themselves to their performance in the past or their economic performance vis-a-vis their neighbors, for example, may be insecure, therefore dissatisfied with the establishment, therefore a potential voter of these parties. Immigration is also an economic issue. There's a lot of far-right voters that are actually worried about the economic consequences of immigration, so labor market competition. For example, I've done quite a lot of work using European social survey data that shows that whereas those concerned with the cultural impact of immigration are core far-right party supporters, in fact, the ones that are worried about the economic consequences of immigration are a larger numerical group. So size matters in that respect. So the point I want to make here is that both culture and economy matter, and that means that the reason why these far-right populist parties are successful is because they've been able to extend support beyond their secure voting base. So what they have done is they have captured voter alliances. So it's not just a question of one particular profile, but rather it's the question of different social groups voting for these parties for different reasons. So to move to the challenges, again, why did I tell you this? This makes them far more difficult to tackle and to address, because it's not just about support from one group, it's support from a variety of different groups with different insecurities that these parties have been able to capitalize upon. So here is important to also look at the supply side story. Now, and if we look at nationalism, what these parties have done is that they have managed to make themselves far more appealing by using what I call a civic nationalist rhetoric. So instead of saying we exclude people on the basis, say, of race or on the basis of ascriptive criteria, they say, no, we exclude people who may be a threat to our society. Perhaps because their ideological views are intolerant, or because they're a threat in the labor market. And so this way they've managed to capitalize on a variety of different voters' insecurities. Now this, I would argue, makes them far more dangerous. I do hear from people that the fact that maybe they're declining in electoral support means that the danger is going away. Or perhaps it's actually healthy to have populism because it serves as a democratic corrective. And this is not too bad because these parties are not openly extreme, such as their predecessors, but actually they've moderated. But I think that this is precisely what is making them dangerous. The danger, these parties are neither new, and as I said, the phenomenon is not linear, but what makes these parties very dangerous is the fact that they now have been able to permeate mainstream ground. So even if they have fewer votes, it's because actually their ideas are becoming more consolidated. UKIP is an excellent example of this. For example, they declined quite a lot electorally, but only after they got the Tories to actually introduce Brexit, right? So the problem is that they are now, the ball is in their court. They are now determining party competition. And this is very true, for example, in terms of immigration policy, we will see that even certain center-left parties are arguing in favor of containing or limiting immigration. And that is because they believe that in order to defeat the far right or far right populism, in essence, we need to become far right populism. So just to quickly conclude, I think that despite the fact that these parties have indeed changed a lot in past years, and that is that they have moderated their narratives. I think that these narratives are actually making them pose an even more important challenge. On a positive note, though, to end, we do see that Brexit, for example, has shown the difficulties of EU exit. So a lot of these parties have also changed their Euroscepticism in an attempt to reform from within. So there is scope for change. And also we do know that there are certain policies, certain social policies that, and I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A if you would like, that do contain far-right party support by directly addressing the insecurities that drive different social groups. So I think that as policymakers or even the state has options available to be able to take, to mitigate the risks that these parties pose. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daphne, for especially setting the scene. So I think that we take a lot of your insights on board, and these will actually be reflected in Tamas' presentation, but also Michele's presentation. You highlighted the importance of variety. The word linear is also something that we will take on for the following discussion. So there's variation across populist parties, but then again, the support that the electorate is also giving to them, it's not linear. A word of caution as well with regards to, you know, the theme in itself, the concept, let's say, of populism, an umbrella theme that of course varies from US to Europe. And also highlighting that certain economic determinants are also, you know, favoring the fact that the electorate is then supporting these parties. So thank you very much, Daphne, indeed, for this first keynote and for having set the scene, as I said. And now it's also high time then to hand over the floor to Tamas Boros, co-director of Policy Solutions, with whom FEPS has tracked, as Daphne also pointed out, the popularity or the rise in support of populist parties across Europe. So we tracked 70 populist parties. So Tamas, I'm pretty sure that our participants back home are curious as to what the numbers are telling us. What are the data telling us? What can you tell us of the last 5 years? Will we speak or can we speak of a populist tsunami in Europe? But as also Heidi said in the beginning, and here I'm looking, you know, into the screen, but hoping that our participants online are already excited with the discussion that we have lined up for you today. I'm reminding you as well, you know, Daphne is here also to take up your questions. After Tamas gives his presentation and Michele as well, you should prepare your questions for these speakers, because after these 3 interventions, we will open for a very short Q&A. But as I said before, handing over the floor to Tamas too, and here also reverting to the FEPS team in the background, we have prepared a poll for you. So can I please ask the FEPS team to screen the poll, also for our panelists and participants. Thank you very much. So here we are. This is the first poll of today's discussion. And this is for us to assess your perceptions with regards to the rise of populist parties in Europe. After that, we will show you what the Populism Tracker data has told us with regards to the populist parties' rise in support in 2019. So please be reminded, you can only vote on 3 countries. So here is the question. In your opinion, which of the following EU member states saw a rise in popularity or a rise in support for populist parties in 2019? We're curious to hear your views and your perspectives. So I will give you a bit of time to select. 3 votes only. Okay, I'm having indication by the FEPS team that we are at 34%. Let's get these numbers up, people. 51%. Thank you. 70%. We're really curious as to what your perceptions are. We will immediately show you what the Populism Tracker data has conveyed. We're over 80%. So yes, thank you very much for joining the first poll, and stay tuned because we will have much more. Now let's see what our tracker actually said. Here we are, interesting. So these are the results by our participants. 46% in Austria, 21% in Belgium, 23% in France, 36% in Germany, Hungary, Italy, clearly topping, the rising popularity for populists, according to our participants online, and 31% for both Spain and Sweden. We will be curious as well to hear then what our panelists in the following session will say, notably Evan, Laszlo Andor, Rafael Glucksmann, Kaisa. Thank you very much. So now, yes, it's time to show what the Populism Tracker has said. Thank you very much, Celine. So here are the results of the Populism Tracker data. And actually, as you can see, most of you thought that Belgium didn't see a rise in support for populist parties, but here we actually saw that in 2019, it got a 15% increase. Finland as well, 30%. So here we're very much looking forward to Kaisa's comments on this, followed then by Cyprus, France, Sweden, Poland, and Lithuania. Then on your left-hand side, you will see those that saw the popularity decrease. Thank you very much. So Tamás, I believe this is a good time then for you to take the floor and provide us, an overview of what we have found with our Populism Tracker over the last 5 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria and Heidi. And thank you for this great introduction, which was not discussed internally. And I loved it very much because it shows exactly the point of our Populism Tracker, because when we started the whole project 5 years ago, our idea was to go beyond the media bubble, go beyond what we see in the news, and let's see what the data shows us, because this is how we can predict, and this is how we can see what exactly going on in terms of populism in Europe. And I think the differences between the data and the image, what we saw from this poll, shows exactly the case, that there are so many talks about Italy and Hungary that everybody believes that these are the countries where there was an increase in popularity in 2019, but actually this was not the case. I have this challenging task to speak about the state of populism of the last year and the state of populism and the trends of the last 5 years in 10 minutes, but I try to meet this challenge. Because just as Heidi Justo and Maria Freitas mentioned, we are not just publishing, or we haven't just published a book about the state of populism, but we also finished a 5-year-long project where we started back in 2015 to see how the popularity of different political parties look like. And let me share, and I hope everybody can see a few slides which we prepared for this occasion. First of all, this last decade showed that populism has actually spilled over from political science jargon into public discourse. So populism is not a new term at all. So for those people who followed political science, populism was present for decades, but in the last 10 years, and especially in the last 5 years, it became part of the public discourse. Nothing shows that better than in the last few years, more than 55,000 academic articles have been published on populism, and the numbers of newspapers, articles, blogs, and social media posts on populism, they number in the millions. So this is something that is very, very much present in all public discourses. But as I mentioned, and as you saw from the introduction, we wanted to differentiate the media bubble and what the journalists speak about populism and the facts. And for the facts, we try to track all the public opinion polls of the then 27 EU member states. We looked at all these opinion polls each month since 2015, and we systematically tracked the popularity of over 70 populist parties in the European Union. And we just published the 5th book on populism. You can download it from FEPS website and Policy Solutions website with all the data. As we have 10 minutes, I just would like to show you 3 very important takeaways for 2020. So what's the state of populism in 2020? And I would like to show you 5 important takeaways from the last decade, and especially from the last 5 years. First of all, you saw it from the number that was just shared, that it actually has been it was actually a mixed year for populist parties in the European Union last year. There were several countries where the popularity of populist parties have increased significantly, especially Belgium, Finland, Cyprus, France, Sweden, and Poland. Also in Lithuania, but it is just in the edge of the margin of error. But in all other countries, we saw a massive increase, and we can also see that these massive increase usually linked with elections. So election time usually helps populist parties, and when we see a massive increase in popularity of populist parties, it's usually during the election campaigns. It happened in Belgium and Finland too. But we also saw some big changes in terms of the popularity of these parties into the other direction when parties lost popularity. There are different reasons, and as it was mentioned in the introduction, you cannot just name one single issue why people vote for populist parties. And also you cannot just name one issue why people are not voting anymore for populist parties. So there are different issues in Croatia, in Hungary, and Latvia, and I don't want to go into details. You can read all of them in the books that we published, but the main message here is that it is not true that last year was a paradise for the populist parties, and it's not true that it is the end of populism in Europe. It was a mixed year, as you can see in our chart. The other important takeaway we believe from last year is that populism is part of the mainstream. So you see that in many countries, the popularity of populist parties are over 50%. In most of the countries, they are over 20% or 30%. So they are just as popular as the center right or the center left. So you can, and you should, and everybody should, including us, handle them just as the same way in terms of attitude as a center right, center left, liberals, and green parties. They are part of the political spectrum. They will remain with us. We have to handle them as political opponents. But we cannot really handle them as some kind of outliners, because in many countries they are even the most important players or among the most important players. So they actually grown up as a mainstream party just as the others. It's also an opportunity. So you can handle them as mainstream, and a lot of people will be disappointed with them because they become part of the elite. They become part of the mainstream, so a lot of people will be disappointed with them as well. But as you see in these graphs, they are present in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Southern Europe, and even now in Northern Europe, as we saw in Sweden in the last few months. Number 3, we see that these parties are especially popular or also popular when they are in government. So the most popular populist parties like Fidesz, the Law and Justice in Poland, the GERB in Bulgaria, and now in Czech Republic, they are all long-time governing parties. The League used to be a governing party. They are not anymore. So just because they are in government, it doesn't mean that they will lose popularity. I will talk about this later on, but the third takeaway from last year is that the most popular populist parties in Europe are actually those parties who are in government. Of course, there are a lot of factors which determines this popularity. So they are not only popular because in government. There are a lot of factors. They change the media landscape. They trigger the system. So we have to take it into consideration as well. That especially in Hungary and Poland, it's not a free and fair elections anymore. But we have to keep it in mind that they stay very popular even when they are in government, even for a decade, like in the case of Fidesz. So these are the three most important trends. You will read a lot more in our books. But also, as we end a 5-year project, I would like to share you 5 important trends from the last 5 years. Number one, which we believe is important, that when we started our whole project, and when we started to examine populist parties back in 2015, both left-wing and right-wing populists increased their respective level of public support. So at that time, we saw, as we call them, populist iron curtain. In a lot of Mediterranean countries, the left-wing populist, the popularity of left-wing populist parties were increasing, while in Central Europe and Western Europe, it was the right-wing. This is not the case anymore. So there are a few countries which are the exceptions. I can tell you a few, but in general, left-wing populism has declined massively in most countries. We know some exceptions, but as a general trend, we can see it. The other important thing that there are no glass ceiling anymore for right-wing populists. So back 10 years ago or 5 years ago, we could hear a lot of experts saying that there is a glass ceiling and right-wing populists will not grow above 10%. And then they increased it, that they will not grow above 15%. And we saw there is no glass ceiling. They can grow wherever they want. But it is usually the case for the right-wing populists, and they can be governing parties. So this glass ceiling doesn't exist anymore. Number two, which is not a new trend, but I think it's important to underline that we also have very much, we also run often into difficulties when we try to categorize populist parties. So a lot of right-wing populist parties who are nativist and who are sometimes xenophobic, they advocate very strange but still welfare programs. Of course, these welfare programs are usually limited to the native population, but we have to underline that even right-wing populist parties advocate sometimes partly left-wing programs. Number three, it is important as well that what I mentioned, it's a growing trend in the last 5 years that those who had claimed that populists will not be able to govern and would soon fail once they took control of the government, these people have been proven wrong. So populists actually tend to remain popular in government and tend to be re-elected. There are exceptions again, of course. One of the important issues which I would like to highlight is when populist parties form a coalition with a centrist party, so center-right or center-left, this often proves to be a little embrace for the populists. So usually, if populists are in government, in a coalition government, when centrist parties, this harm a lot the populist parties. But when they govern alone or with another populist party, they tend to be re-elected or they tend to remain very popular even after a few years in government. Number four, it is very important to see that there is a key dividing line between the populists of various regions in terms of their relationship to liberal democracy. So we see that in many Western European countries, these parties are adhered to the ground rules of democratic competition. So maybe we don't like what they do, maybe they are xenophobic, maybe they spread hate speech, but they actually don't transform the whole democratic institutional structure. This is not the case in Eastern and Central Europe. So in those countries, also because of the overwhelming support of these parties, they transform the whole democratic institutional structure. And finally, number 5, I would like to finish with some good news. This is the 5th takeaway from the last 5 years. And this is that because of the chaos that Brexit meant to a lot of people, and because of the improvement of the European economic and employment data, a lot of populist parties just stopped speaking about exits and leaving the European Union, and the anti-EU rhetoric of these parties almost everywhere except for United Kingdom disappeared. So EU is more popular than in the last decades. Even among most countries, EU is more popular than ever. So the struggle between pro-Europeans and anti-European forces has been decisively won by the former in the last 5 years. And this is a good news. So pro-Europeanism is something that is winning, and something which is a very good news for the last 5 years. Thank you very much.
Tamas, thank you very much for this contribution of yours, and for giving us a very quick but yet very clear description of the trends that across in Europe as far as populist parties are concerned. And thank you for closing with actually a positive note. I noticed some points in common also with what Daphne said before, and using Daphne's words, actually the fact that populism is permeating more and more mainstream. I think this is something to be kept in mind. Because time is running very fast, I would like to move on with our panel. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, whose name is Michele Di Donato, assistant professor of Contemporary History at the University of Pisa, and member of the Scientific Committee of the Fondazione Gramsci. However, before leaving the floor to Michele, he will forgive me for this, we have another little, I wouldn't call it really poll, but another little quiz for the audience. As I mentioned before, the book that Michele is going to introduce focuses on how the language of politics has been changing in the last years. And for this reason, we thought of presenting you with a few statements, a few quotes by Italian politicians, quotes which have of course been chosen, quoted from the book itself that we're presenting today. And we will ask you to guess who said what. So please, yes, I can read you the first question. Celine, please don't show the answers, otherwise you have to put, Celine, the slideshow. It has to be a slideshow. So anyway, the first question is against the Soviet European, against the Soviet European Union, which starves our people and at the same time opens the door to the invasion of illegal immigrants. Dear Brussels bureaucrats, dear Angela Merkel, prepare to clear out, because the European people will give you on Sunday the expulsion order. So we will propose you now 4 politicians who may have said so. No, sorry. So the 4 politicians were among which to choose were Matteo Renzi, Beppe Grillo, Silvio Berlusconi, and Matteo Salvini. If the poll starts, you can vote, although you may have already seen the answer, I'm afraid. So I don't know if it's worthy to continue with this, and I'm moving already to the second question because you've already seen the answer. The answer was quite simple, I guess, because that's this in the tone of the. Okay, let's try if you haven't seen. Let's try to answer. So if you please vote, you can choose between Matteo Renzi, who at the time was the leader of the Democratic Party, Beppe Grillo, who is the founder of the FEPS movement, Silvio Berlusconi, who doesn't need any kind of introduction, and Matteo Salvini, leader of the Northern League, or actually the League nowadays. So if you vote, it's easy. Apart from the fact that you may have seen the answer, it's easy because the tone is quite easy to recognize. So 60% have voted. I expect now people to guess exactly. So 85% has correctly chosen the politician, Matteo Salvini. 3% believe it was Silvio Berlusconi, 6% Beppe Grillo, and 6% Matteo Renzi. And now the next question. So move on. Okay, this is, I think, is a bit more difficult to recognize. In my pantheon, there are no politicians. I have never thought of myself as being a politician, but rather an anti-politician. Again, the same politicians to be chosen among Silvio Berlusconi, Matteo Salvini, Beppe Grillo, or Matteo Renzi. So please vote. Who do you think said this word? I again think this time is a bit more difficult. It's still, particularly for Italians, I believe, understandable. But so, how many vote? If you haven't voted yet, please do it so we can offer you the answer to this second quiz. Okay, we can close the votes. So, okay, 33% believe it's Silvio Berlusconi, 3% believes it's Matteo Salvini, 53% Beppe Grillo, and 11% Matteo Renzi. Actually, the correct answer is Silvio Berlusconi, who said so already in 2013 on the occasion of the electoral campaign for the general elections in Italy. And the last quote, if you can move slide, please. I think this is an increased difficulty. The European Union does not assign any homework to us. Enough of the constant Italian refrain whereby Europe is depicted as the place where we come to receive our homework. We have no reassurances to give. Italy knows perfectly what it must do and will do it of its own will for the future of our kids. So again, who said so? Silvio Berlusconi, Matteo Renzi, Beppe Grillo, or Matteo Salvini? Please take your time, take a little time to think and then give your opinion. So, almost there. Just a few seconds before we close for the voting, and then we will see the results of this last quiz. Okay, 70% have voted. And let's close now. And let's see the results. Oh, I'm surprised. Because actually, the majority of you gave the correct answers, which is Matteo Renzi. 19%, so 61% believe Matteo Renzi, 19% Beppe Grillo, 17% Matteo Salvini, and only 3% Silvio Berlusconi. So in fact, it was Matteo Renzi who at the time was Prime Minister of Italy and leader of the Democratic Party. As you know, he's no longer either leader or member of the Democratic Party. He said this, which proved, I think, to a certain extent, that how mainstream parties are not immune from a certain type of rhetoric and language. So after this small quiz, very quickly, because we are actually behind our schedule, I'm giving the floor to our next speaker, whom I already introduced. Michele, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie, and thank you to the previous speakers for their presentations, which have introduced themes that will come back in my own presentation, I believe. Let's start with the quiz, because I think this quiz we've just participated to is quite illustrative. I mean, these were just 3 sound bites, but they did illustrate some aspects of this changing political discourse in Italy. That is the topic of the book we are presenting. I mean, we've seen examples of the themes and of the style of nationalist and populist political communication. We've seen examples of the longer term origins of Italian populism. I mean, Silvio Berlusconi, a 4-time prime minister, claiming to consider himself as not a politician, but an anti-politician, whatever that means, but still, it's quite significant. And we've seen, as Heidi just said, the potential that these ideas and this style have to circulate and to spread to other political forces. So nationalist and populist discourses are all but new in Italian politics, but it was really in the aftermath of the 2008 economic crisis that they gained increasing resonance, and they completed their march, so to speak, from the fringes to the center of the public debate. A march which culminated in 2018 in the formation of the coalition government of the Five-Star Movement and Matteo Salvini's League, which was a self-described populist government. In this book, we look at this transformation of Italian politics from a specific point of view. We don't focus on policies, but we look at how the very language of politics has changed in the aftermath of the global crisis. So basically, what we talk about when we talk about politics in Italy, and how the most important political parties have been articulating their worldviews. Nationalist and populist anti-establishment parties adopt specific language. They adopt distinctive communication strategies. And in this book, we have tried, first of all, to deconstruct and to analyze them. What are the motifs? What are the recurring tropes of the political communication? What are the varieties of populist discourse that are to be heard in Italy? But at the same time, we've tried to direct attention to another problem, that is the influence this new style of communication, this new political agenda have had on the mainstream parties, especially on the center left, of course. And these, we believe, are problems and dilemmas that are common to most European countries and to most European progressive parties. So while Italy is our case study, of course, we believe that the findings of this research speak to broader European issues and to broader European concerns. So much for our research questions. Let me move to a brief presentation of the structure of the book and of its main findings. This book is the product of a collaboration between FEPS and Fondazione Gramsci, which have jointly conceived and jointly coordinated this project. But the credit for the final result is really all due to the fantastic team of political scientists who have carried out the research and authored the chapters. So Giacomo Bottos, Eleonora Desiata, and Andrea Pareschi. The book has a very rich, I would say, methodological introduction, and is then divided into 3 chapters in which Giacomo, Eleonora, and Andrea analyze the transformation of the Italian political discourse around 3 crucial themes. These are democracy and institutions, boundaries of citizenship, and foreign and European policy. Each chapter contains an in-depth analysis of the articulation of political discourse by the four largest Italian political parties, or what were at the time of writing, the four largest Italian political parties. So the Five Star Movement, the League, the Democratic Party, and Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia. And this analysis is based on a wide collection of sources, which range from election manifestos to social media posts. And really, social media has been a special target of analysis in this book. It would be almost impossible, I'm afraid, to summarize the findings of the book in the 5 minutes or so that I have left. So what I will try to do is to give you some highlights, and the authors will forgive me for my brevity. So concerning democracy and institutions, a very interesting finding concerns the different articulation of the anti-establishment critiques of the Five Star Movement and of Matteo Salvini's League. For the Five Star Movement, which is kind of the quintessential populist party, the critique of the political class and of representative democracy is a core topic, which is combined with the claim for forms of direct democracy based on individuals using the internet with no party, no institutional mediation whatsoever. And I would say so much we knew. What is interesting is to compare and contrast this approach with the approach of the League, which one finds out has very, very little to say about institutions and about democracy. Matteo Salvini's political communication insists very much on the concept of national sovereignty as a crucial attribute to be protected against alleged external enemies like the European Union, like immigrants, and so on and so forth. But then one finds out that this idea of sovereignty is an empty one. It's an empty shell, as the party communication almost never touches upon the issues of how this sovereignty should be exercised or how the citizens could participate in decision-making once these external obstacles, let's say, are overcome. The chapter on boundaries of citizenship proposes a reinterpretation of one of the key themes of nationalist and populist discourse, that is the anti-migration discourse. And the chapter shows that the discourse on migration should be understood or can be understood as part of a wider issue, that is the populist framing of citizenship and rights. Because the hostile rhetoric deployed against migrants is not only based on a scapegoat strategy, say, but is also based on strong material incentives. To be clear, the underlying idea, which is expressed in more or less manifest ways by different political forces, is that welfare provisions for Italian citizens are insufficient, and too many resources are being devoted to migrants, or precisely because too many resources are being devoted to migrants. So the boundaries of citizenship are framed as increasingly exclusive, increasingly rigid by nationalists and populists. On this point, further on this point, drawing on the work of sociologist Rogers Brubaker, the chapter singles out two dimensions in the discourse of the anti-establishment parties. So there's an external dimension pitting those who belong in the national community against everyone who's not a member. So migrants, foreign powers, supranational institutions, the EU, and so on and so forth. And this can be understood as a sort of horizontal divide, right, between those who are inside and those who are outside the community. But then there's a second dimension within the national community, characterized by the interaction of multiple divides that have to do with the socio-economic milieu, with economic and cultural differences. So a divide that separates what is identified as the people and what is identified as the elite. And this can be understood as a sort of vertical divide, right, between those who are on top and those who are below within the national community. What happens is that the two dimensions end up interacting. And it is here that the nationalist and populist anti-establishment discourse become particularly vicious. Because people who are identified as being part of the elite are depicted as being located on top on this vertical axis within the national community, but they end up being also considered as being outside of the polity, outside of the community. They are not real citizens. They're not real Italians. They are not defending the real interests of the real Italians, but they should rather be conceived as part of a ruthless, transnational, globalist class. And this is a discourse that should ring, that will ring, I suppose, alarming bells with those who are familiar with the history of discrimination in 20th century Europe. Finally, these are themes that also recur in the chapter on foreign and European policy, a policy area in which the dilemmas faced by progressives are particularly evident. Throughout the period under examination, the Democratic Party exhibited an ideal commitment to the European identity and an electoral stance based on the idea that nothing is possible without Europe. That being said, during the premiership of Matteo Renzi, the party's European message has been closely aligned to the leader's communication strategy. And this has led to certain slips, right, so to speak, with some controversial policy choices, for instance, on migration, which were paralleled by the adoption of quasi-nationalist discursive tropes, such as in the statement that we've seen in the quiz at the beginning of the presentation. Okay, so I think my time is up and I shall leave it here, and maybe we can come back on some themes during the Q&A. So I shall return the floor to Heidi.
Not to Heidi this time, Michele, to me actually, but no worries. Thank you very much for your presentation. As you rightfully said from the start, indeed, we saw much of the reflections that Daphne and Tamás brought about in your own presentation, summarizing a big challenge, summarizing such a big publication that Fondazione Gramsci has realized together with FEPS, Language of Politics, and how it has impacted the language of progressive parties, the narrative, and here, of course, with the special lens towards Italy. Now, I must say, I'm slightly disappointed with our participants online. We just got 2 questions in the Zoom chat box, to which Tamás actually already replied. So seeing as well that, you know, we are slowly, you know, getting on the time for the next panel, I would just like to motivate you still to bring about your questions. Daphne, Michele, and Tamás will still continue here in our webinar with us. Even though some of the speakers will also have to slowly go. So here I hand over back the floor to Heidi to then introduce the panel that comes after.
Maria, thank you very much, and thanks to the speakers. So far it's been very interesting, and I've seen from the chat that everybody seems to be very engaged in the conversation with questions and with observations. Now let's move to the second part of our event. We have, as I said at the beginning, a group of very good speakers today. I will change slightly the order of the speakers because one of them is to leave soon because of previous important engagement. So I have a question that goes to all the speakers. So I will say it now and don't need to repeat again afterwards, I hope. The question is, what is your recommendation, your recipe for progressive forces to lead the progressive narrative rather than reacting to the one set by the populist parties? And of course, give also us a perspective from your own country. So our first speaker is Lorenzo Consoli, who is Ask a News EU correspondent and is Italian, he's from Italy. Thank you, Lorenzo, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we cannot see you yet.
No?
Is your okay?
Can you see me?
Yeah, your voice is very low.
Okay, I can speak louder. Is it
Yeah,
okay like
please,
that?
yes,
Okay,
please.
good.
Okay, now we can hear you better, and we can.
Okay, yeah. What I can say, well, if I understood well, I should speak about Italy, but I would like to start with one thing. There is a new element that has to be taken into consideration, and this is the recovery package by the Commission with the new multi-annual budget for the EU that has been presented on the 27th of May, and the leaders of the EU are called to come to an agreement by the 17th and 18th of June or July in this first European Council that will happen face-to-face, physically, in Brussels. And this is very important, I think, also from the populistic dimension, because it can, if it succeeds, this project, it can subtract, it can take out of the table one of the main sources of the rise of populism in Europe in the last few years, in more than 5 years, I would say in the last 10 years, which is the wrong economic policies that have been adopted by the EU with a double deep recession that happened after the 2008 crisis, and the fact that in particular for what has been called the left-wing populism, but not only, because there is also a very important part of the right-wing narrative, populist narrative, which is based on the mistakes, it has been fueled by the mistakes made by the European Union in responding to the prior crisis. So this is the first thing, the first element I would like to put on the table. Let's look at what will happen if the attempt to have for the first time a common debt in Europe, 500 billions, common debt in Europe, which will be spent where it's more needed to get back to growth and to heal the impact of the COVID-19 will have. So let's look what will happen there. First thing. Then a second thing I would say, this is about specifically about Italy. I think in Italy there is a very interesting phenomenon happening now. The five-star movement is more and more. It used to be not right, not left. It used to be anti-politics, and that's it. It's now is much more, I think, characterized as a left-wing movement than it used to be before, for the simple reason that most of the right-wing people that used to be in there have gone into the Northern League during the government between the League and the five-star movements. They are smaller. The five-star movement is smaller, but is much more left-wing, I think, in this moment than it used to be before. First thing. Second thing, they actually they've been occupying the ground of the Greens in Italy. The Greens in Italy don't exist anymore. They are very, very small. And the instances, all the narrative of the Greens has been taken by the five-star movements. And there is a shift in this moment, I think, in the five-star movement that is happening. They could become much less populistic and much more green, left-wing, popular movement, let's say, not anti-European. Let's not forget, this is the other element. The MEPs from the five-star movement have voted in favor of von der Leyen, almost all of them. They support the majority in favor of von der Leyen in this moment. They've always been together with the Greens and with the more with the left than with the sovereignists in the right. And this is quite important because this is not the behavior of populist movement. And the last thing I would say, then I would stop, is that actually the new government, after the enormous mistake that Salvini made to switch off the former government, where the League and the Five-Star Movement were together, Salvini has gone down and down in the polls. He is now actually at 26%, while he had reached almost 40%, and while the Five-Star Movement is 15%, and the Partito Democratico is around 20%. The Partito Democratico and Five-Star Movement are governing together, and this is actually not easy, but it's working. It has worked during the crisis, even if there are problems there, like everywhere else. But it is working. That shows that actually it is possible for a populist movement to change. The Five-Star Movement is changing, and it could actually occupy space in the Italian political horizon which exists, and this space is, as I said before, the green leftist space, while on the other side the League is more and more nationalist, sovereignist, anti-European, even if now it's not popular to be anti-European, and it is actually, let's say, in the real populist movement in Italy now. And the last thing, and I finished, let's look at what's happening also to Fratelli d'Italia, which is now at 15% in Italy, and it didn't exist before almost. It has taken all the space of Forza Italia, which is now reduced to 6% only, and they are right-wing populist as well. So let's look at them also. That's it.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. I hope you can stay with us a bit longer to listen also to the other speakers. You made at the beginning also a very important point, how the weapons, the tools of the populist, of the European populist parties in Italy and beyond Italy will be missing important tools if the European Council in mid-July will agree on important recovery instruments. I'm giving now very quickly the floor to our next speaker, who is Kaisa Vatanen, who is director of the Kalevi Sorsa Foundation, member of FEPS from Finland. Kaisa, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heidi, and thank you very much for FEPS for the invitation. And also thank you very much for the previous speakers. They've been very, very interesting and great inputs. Someone in the questions or in the comments mentioned that what is the left-wing and right-wing populism, but I have to say at the beginning that I will be mostly talking about right-wing populism because that is a question and a theme here in Finland, and I will be talking very much from the Finnish perspective. As you saw in the slides earlier, we have a very successful far-right populist party here in Finland, the Finns Party, and which has been, well, it's the second biggest in the polls at the moment. It was the second biggest in the elections last year, and it has very much set the tone of the political field and the political discussion in the last 15, almost 20 years now in Finland. So it's been a long-standing party in the national setting. Although it's a party that has been around for a long time, it is also a party that was in the previous government, and what happened to it in the government was that it split in half. halfway through the mandate, and the other half that remained in the government practically disappeared from the electoral map in the last elections. That makes the elections of last year interesting in for two reasons. First one is that populist party in power in Finland seems it very difficult to retain the support in the following elections. With that I get back in a moment. And the second reason is that the populist party that then did do a really good result, exactly the same result as in previous election, was the half of the populist party that was purely far right, and it's a lot more ideologically pure, if you say, you can say so, to the kind of very far right ideology, which means that in Finland now we have a lot stronger, a lot more extreme party in the parliament as the second largest party, and that alone is rather a scary development. But I think Daphne Halikipolo at the beginning described something very important, which I was going to mention somehow, but she put it in better in words, and that was the idea that the parties themselves are not so much what is scary or dangerous. It's the ideas that are internalized in the mainstream parties of the other mainstream parties in the political system. And I think that is a very much at the beginning of the answer to your question about what we should do as to tackle these things. In Finland, for a long time, the Populist Party managed to set the political agenda at the national level. It was the true Finns who were able to set the questions that the other parties had to respond to. They were the agenda setters. And this is important. This is how they succeeded. They raised issues to agenda, be it the EU, be it the migration, be it the poverty, you name it. Economic question, but the importance of this is that as long as they were able to set the questions, they didn't need to answer them so well themselves. Others needed to react and provide answers. And this is one of the key points to how they managed to succeed and continue to succeed. What happened in the elections last year was a big question between whether we will have a government led by the Social Democrats or the populist True Finns party. The Social Democrats won it, and I would claim that what happened was that it's because the Social Democrats got their act together for the first time in nearly 2 decades in here. And by getting their act together, I don't mean that they managed to do a good campaign or good communication, the visuals were good. This is all something that obviously contributes to it. But for the first time in almost 20 years, there was a concrete programmatic work in the party for the previous 2 to 3 years leading up to the elections. And the whole party's program work started setting the goals, not to these elections, not to this 4 years, but to 2030s. And it was really kind of visionary work. I must say that it's not always been easy for the party, or it's not undecisive. But what happened was that when there was a clear alternative, it changed the dynamics of the political system. And the Social Democrats were the ones who were setting the questions and also providing their own alternatives. And the others, including the populists, had to answer to these questions. And the influence of that was that the Social Democrats got a better hand because they were able to set the questions that we're discussing about. And the populists had a great difficulties to answering to them. So I think the big question now for the Social Democrats or the progressives in Finland and elsewhere as well is not about how do you win the elections or how do you get the position of power, but how do you use it? And again, I would return to something that Daphne was saying at the beginning, that it's the question of how you respond to the insecurities of the people. I don't think it's really, in most cases, that by answering you can't answer to the insecurities by doing different migration policy, but you have to do policy that is on related to employment, social security, healthcare, education, family policies, and etc., which is the core of the progressive mainstream policy anyway. And by that you can reduce the insecurities, and then you can respond to the issues why the support for the populists have been growing. And I think the very, very big key to that is that the left progressive parties have to be progressive in their policies, and they have to have concrete policies that offer actually concrete solutions to these issues rather than the beautiful pictures. But that's it. I will finish and try to hopefully I get in my time. Thank you.
Kaiser, thank you very much. So basically, in a nutshell, let's be progressive in order to fight insecurity. From Finland to Hungary now, I would like to give the floor to the Secretary General of FEPS, Dr. Laszlo Andor. Laszlo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hedy. And indeed, speaking from Budapest, I would also like to highlight the fact that democracy is a relatively new system. So when we need to discuss what exactly threatens democracy, the first point to see is that the universal franchise is something that was introduced after World War I in most cases. Germany and democracy and Italy were only democratized after World War II. Much of East Central Europe after the Cold War, and the Iberian countries in the 1970s. So this is a relatively recent development and not as stable as a lot of people would believe. If we need to count what represents the main threat to democracy, I would put neoliberalism to the top, because neoliberalism is the political tendency, an economic doctrine which tries to hollow out democracy. In the sense that, if people have the franchise, of course, they should go to vote once in 4 or 5 years, but it should not have an effect. It should not have an effect, right? So we need to depoliticize monetary policy, depoliticize fiscal policy, detach all this capacity to make change in income distribution and economic outcomes, to separate this from the democratic process. And this is a tendency that devalues democracy in the eyes of many, many people. And the next step is when the center-right, mainly the conservative center-right, actually turns not only against the welfare consensus of the post-war years, but also the democratic consensus, meaning that they start undermining the neutrality of the state, public media, public services start functioning in different way under oligarchistic influence. There are various methods for this, which we can elaborate on a different occasion. And then the problem is that the center right and the far right become indistinguishable. They very often grow together. The center right grows to the position of the far right, or vice versa. So if you ask about Hungary, in Hungary it was not the far right that destroyed democracy, it was the center right, an EPP member party, which destroyed democracy, following the inspiration of an Italian center right party, which was again not the Lega, but the EPP member Silvio Berlusconi. So I think it also was possible because a lot of voters or potential voters were indifferent after many rounds of election, when they saw that participation in the election doesn't necessarily result in a positive change. In other words, it doesn't really have a value because they can't improve their living conditions. There is always someone coming from the outside, International Monetary Fund, for example, telling the government what to do. So in a way, the left has a chance to defend democracy if we insist on a concept of democracy which is material, which is not simply formalistic, that once in a while we go to the elections and then we influence who is going to be head of state and receive the other head of state at the airport and make speeches, but if there is a material dimension, I think social democracy can fulfill its objectives. And for that, indeed, we need to confront the neoliberals and the center-right, which often hide behind various ideologies. And the previous speaker, Lorenzo, also highlighted the failure of the European economic policy and its responsibility 10 years ago during the Great Recession and the Euro crisis. That also happened because the Social Democrats failed to confront the liberals and the center-right. So there is a lot of truth in that, I fully agree. And in order to do this, I think we have to stop demonizing populism, because that's where that's not where the essence of the problem lies. Populism, as it is often used, is about mixing apples and oranges and bananas. Very, very different qualities are brought together into this basket. So we simply cannot tell the Finnish Social Democrats or the Spanish Social Democrats or the Italian Social Democrats that their coalition partners are actually the same breed or the same category as the neo-fascists or the neo-Nazis. So in that case, the political categorization becomes a problem in itself. The Social Democrats have a chance to defend democracy if social democracy itself develops as a democratic movement involving a lot of political education and proving that by democratic participation, progressive change is possible and it can be delivered. And that effect also needs to be highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laszlo. You added a few more pieces to the puzzle that we are reconstructing here. You mentioned neoliberalism, and you mentioned as well the role played not only by the far right parties, how we tend to do very much too often, but by the center right parties in countries such as Hungary and Italy. We go now to our first speaker, and we move to Sweden now. So Evin Hinshir, who is a member of the European Parliament and of the SND group. Evin, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I also, as the previous speaker was, to thank you for arranging this event and for inviting me to speak on this event. This is actually a topic that we as a parliamentarian here in Brussels, where I am at right now, are working or are being faced with daily because of the amount of populist parties or representatives, at least from the populist parties, that we are forced to deal with daily. But nevertheless, to just a bit start up with on the situation in Sweden, I could echo basically what Kajsa have said on the situation in Finland. Also in Sweden, the populist party we have is embodied in the form of Sweden Democrat, which is a far right party, who actually is not only a populist party but has its root coming from the white supremacies. Looking back just 2 decades back, they were a white supremacist party. But they have become more mainstream, they have been more normalized, and they have, in a certain extent, managed to be those setting the agenda. And I would say that what everyday people would like to see is that politicians are fighting for their cause, and that politicians understand what are their needs. And there comes the Swedish Democrat or Sweden Democrats and gives an answer to what people feel is problematic, and people feel that the story that they are telling is actually addressing the feeling and the need that they are or the challenges that they are being that they feel that they are faced with. And this is something what we also need to learn, that if we want everyday people to vote for us, we need to show that we are fighting for everyday people with the story that we are telling about how the situation is, but also then giving answers on those challenges. And the answers on the challenges, of course, cannot be the answers that the far right movements are doing, are setting. It should be, and it must be, social democratic solution, in the sense of, for example, when inequalities is not connected to migration. Inequalities is many times connected with what has, for example, been said with austerity measures, with tax cuttings, and so on and so on. And looking just to the party Sweden Democrats here in Sweden, they're actually saying one thing and then they're doing something else. I don't remember who it was before me who were saying that And the populist party is sometimes, or even on the right side, might be on the right side, but they also sometimes conducting left policies. I would rather say that they're not necessarily conducting left policies, but they are speaking the language of the left. And that is something that I would say is quite dangerous, and but it has led to them grow. So what I would say that we need to do is, one, to show that we are the ones as Social Democrats fighting the struggle for everyday people. Two, showing it through the story that we are telling and the proposals that we are putting forward, and not jumping on the boat where after the populist parties and so on have put the agenda. We need to be the one leading it. Then we also need to be where people are. For one example is the elections here in Sweden. I almost said here, but in Sweden of the 2018, and also for 2019 in the European elections. We had 2018, we had the national elections. But during the 2018 and 19, we did something that was actually that led to more people going to the polls, and that was, we were knocking doors, we were meeting people face to face. And this is something that we shouldn't only do when it's election times, we need to do it between the elections, talk to the people where the people are. I think that's also one thing that that is important. Connected back to what I was just saying before, I was saying being where people are is the issue of showing that we have the answers. Take COVID-19, for example. During the COVID-19, in Sweden, we saw the decline of support for the Sweden Democrats, while a rise for support for our Social Democratic Party with 7-8% even, which is quite high for a couple of months. But that showed that when it comes to showing that you can have something done and you have the concrete solutions, the populist parties are not the ones who have the solutions. And this is something that we also need to learn from, that we need to constantly show that we are the one having the solutions, regardless of how the challenges look like. Now, unfortunately, it has been the last month, we have been, the challenges has mainly been, or is embodied as COVID-19, and we hope that we will be able to very fastly come out of it, so that people do not lose their lives and health, and more also that we show both on the national level but also European level that we have the answers on to limit the consequences that might come after the COVID-19, because they are also dangerous in the sense of affecting people's life. We have already seen a lot of people losing their jobs and so on. And this is not going to be less people, and it's not going to be less people losing their jobs upcoming months and maybe upcoming half year. It might be the opposite, that it's more and more people. And there we need to show that we actually have the answers on how we make sure to get out of this together. And finally, also, what is important that we show is that the cooperation on many of the challenges that we see today is not connected to the national boundaries. It needs to be done through cross borders, because many of these populist parties, especially on the right side, on the far right side, they are saying that we should go back to basically, now I'm drawing it to the extreme, but dissolving the EU, and the national government should have more to say and EU less to say. I would rather say that many of the challenges we see today, we need more cross-party cooperation, cross-country cooperation to solve them. So there are quite a lot of things that I think we can learn from what has happened the last years and what is happening right now, and to get out of the current situations with more support for us, rather than for the parties who are very much focusing on short-term solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Evin, for your passionate appeal to being social democratic, to walk the talk, and to raise the opportunity offered by this crisis. I would like now to give the floor to our next speaker, who is another member of the European Parliament from France, Raphael Glucksmann. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you for organizing this conference. I think it's very timely and quite interesting. I mean, I would like to start by being quite provocative, if you allow me, because I want to go on with what Laszlo has said. I want to challenge the terminology populist, because actually it's true that it's mixing apples with bananas, or I don't remember the expression. But if populism is about challenging institutions, challenging intermediary bodies in the society, challenging the right for media to interview politicians, challenging all the institutions that shape a non-Caesaristic society, then I could say even that my president, which is a centrist one, is acting like a populist. So I don't think that the threat we are confronted with is it can be summed up in this populistic terminology. I think we have a threat of far right, which uses populism as a strategy, while we could use it, or anybody can use it, on the left, on the center, among environmentalists. But the main problem is the far right. I mean, we don't have so many threats coming from far left populistic movements, and at least in France, clearly we have a far right issue, because the left and the socialists especially have lost the popular vote. You know, I'm very happy because for once we got very good surprises from the last mayoral elections in France. I mean, nobody would expect the left to win in Marseille, in Bordeaux, in cities that were really conservative before. But when you analyze the vote, even when we win, we don't win with popular classes. We win because popular electorates did not go to vote. And that's the truth, and we have to face it. So now we are in a situation in which, like in France, I know it's different in some countries, but in France, people who are voting for the left and who gave us victories are people from centers of big cities. And they have a very progressive agenda on morality issues, on migration, on environment. And we speak to them. But we don't speak to those who vote for alleged populistic party or for far right, or who don't go to vote. And that's our main issue, is if we want to really challenge these movements, and especially far right movements, then we will have to go back to speak to their voters. And it's not enough. I mean, I was in Clermont-Ferrand, a small town, I mean, medium town of France, last Thursday. And there was a demonstration of workers from a factory close to Clermont-Ferrand. And they were producing bottles of oxygen for hospitals and firemen. And the company owned by Anglo-American fund, Luxfer, decided to just erase the factory while it was still making a lot of benefits, but for short-term profits reasons. And then you speak to the workers and they tell you, you know, next time we will vote for Marine Le Pen. And if you don't bring solutions, protections for these workers, then you can't stop Marine Le Pen from rising. So it's not by standing in front of her and saying, no, pass her, and that we will manage to actually confront her. We need to bring to these people that we have abandoned, we need to bring them concrete solutions. It was said by previous interventions. And this implies two things. First thing, it's to challenge our own vision. I mean, to challenge our projects, including at the European level. Why we lost support among these classes? also because we defended really globalization for a long period, and that it has shaken like lower social classes, and that they lost jobs because of externalization of value chains, of delocalization. And then we participated as social democrats in that, in this consensus about free trade being the future of the world. So we have to challenge our own project. And second, we have to change our own strategy. And it's very, it's different for countries where you have like strong unions and strong connections between social democratic parties and unions. In France, it's not the case. So in France, we really changed our electorate. So our strategy now is very simple. Either we speak to those who vote for us as we speak, be it us or Greens, same electorate now, a bit younger for Greens, but otherwise it's the same social class. So either we keep speaking to this well established and well, I mean, people who are happy with globalization, basically, even if they want to correct some excess of it, or we decide to go to the people who actually need us. And that should be our strategy, because otherwise we will be wiped out. So the two things we have to do, according to me, is first to defend institutions and the European project. That's why, for instance, I proposed to the group in Brussels that we created this special committee against foreign interference and disinformation, because we have to be the ones who protect our public debate and our democracy from foreign interference, support from Putin to far-right movement, for instance, and that's the main example. But second, we have to give to this institution, once again, a horizon of social emancipation. I mean, we cannot only defend institutions. We have to show that these institutions, they can ensure social progress. And right now, as we speak, we are not there yet. I mean, we have to be honest with each other. I speak about France, but in general, in the European debate, we are not there yet. We need to really change more in our own projects as social democrats. Otherwise, we'll be having the same conference, but under many more so-called populistic governments. So thank you, and the debate is just starting.
Thank you very much, Raphael. Indeed, the debate is just starting now that we were, getting excited, finding solutions, coming forward with concrete proposals for socialists and Democrats to tackle populist parties. We are slowly coming to an end of this webinar. So at first, I would, of course, like to thank very much our panelists of this session, but also Daphne for having set the scene, Tamas for the great presentation on the numbers, where we are after 5 years, and Michele for his intervention in showcasing how the language of politics has changed. So is populism transforming Europe's politics? This was the guiding question of our webinar today. But I would also like to refer to the questions that our participants raised. So thank you very much for having engaged with FEPS in the chat box. So we answered some of your questions, but due to time constraints, I will propose the following to our panelists and experts that are joining us here. So all of you are not off the hook, so mind you. So we have 3 questions that were raised, and therefore FEPS will tag our MEPs, our experts, our professors to reply to these questions then online. And these are the following. We had a question from Maria Peiro, who asks whether the COVID-19 pandemic will lead to a rise in support of populist parties and whether this actually entails a threat for the future of Europe. The second question comes from Richard Luther, who conveys also on the supply side of populist parties. This was mentioned by Daphne. So if the populist parties are providing the answer to contemporary problems, we saw that in the 2008 crisis, and now we see it with the COVID pandemic. What will happen? What will happen? So this was the question by Richard, and especially what will it mean in terms of the EU's response to the economic effects of the COVID-19? And last but not least, a third question by Laszlo Bugli. And this is perhaps more suited to the work of Evan and Raphael in the European Parliament, because Laszlo inquires on the legislative work that S&D MEPs are pursuing exactly to address the populist parties and their rise, and also curiosity as how you, as MEPs, tackle the populist politicians in the EP plenary. How do you tackle the disruptive effect that these can have in the discussions? So these are the questions, and I would like to thank, of course, very, very much our participants for having raised these questions. These were transmitted now to our speakers. They will continue online. As Raphael said, the conversation has just started, and exactly because the conversation has just started, we will hand over now the floor for the concluding remarks as to what FEPS will do next. And so therefore, it's my pleasure to give the floor to Anja Skripczek, Director of Research and Training at FEPS.
Thank you very much, Maria, and thank you to all that made this discussion and this seminar such an extreme success. I have to say that when we were debating how we structure the seminar, quite a few moments we delivered to thinking about the following thought. There was a suggestion that one of the panels should be entitled Responding to Populism. And I think it has been quite clear throughout the discourse of this afternoon, it's good we did not choose this title, because in fact what we are trying to do as populist forces is not a response to populists in terms of being in defense, but rather responding to the cause that enable populism to rise. By saying that, I think Laszlo Andor has given us a very insightful comment by talking about the neoliberalism, and I think connected with that there is the whole discussion about the future of the party to being catch-all parties. How come that there has been so much of a fringe of politics that became the mainstream of politics, and what's the reason for which the frictions that they have built on became now the main dividing lines when it comes to politics. Lots of questions that have been asked in the space of this debate have been directed to the context we are particularly now in. It has been said that every country has a different reason, even though we have underpinning neoliberal globalization, the detested side of the globalization agenda that enable different populist parties to rise. The main context that we are dealing with now is, of course, the context of COVID pandemics and all the difficulties that it has exacerbated and all the inequalities that will come into rise once again. Hence, I think that this discussion has been quite instrumental to make us realize that the threat that is in front of us, the threat to democracy, the threat to the way we live, the threat to being together generally, because populism is, if anything, about frictions, about trying to argue for respect of some by disrespecting the others, by trying to advance for some by denying the certain level of social progress, by trying to argue for inclusion by promoting exclusion. I think that those things are very important while we are discussing the way we want to go forward, both with the future of Europe debate, but also with the way we want Europe to recover from the times of pandemic that will still have harsh impacts on our societies. It is extremely important what has been said by Daphne at the very beginning, but also by the different speakers. You know, we all enjoyed also the different quiz that showed that, you know, perception matters. And here the definition of the populism has been very much at stake, and a couple of questions went also onto that. And I think it is important sign for FEPS, which is an organization that is committed to the research about how to make quality of our democracy better, but also how to make our understanding of different processes better and how to make ourselves more matriculous. So when we speak about the parties, and I think there was an interesting discussion about the case of Cyprus, there was a discussion about Greece, there was a discussion about Poland, the discussion about category, some question about the definition has been placed, but I think we have to take the challenge straight on. When we talk right wing, we should talk right wing. When we use the word fascism, just as much as Laszlo used it, we should use them. because they carry specific notions and they carry specific things that we as progressives and as Democrats will always stand against, always defending social justice, always defending the value of democracy. And to that end, I think Rafael Glucksmann and Evia Insen were also right by saying that it is not only about the arguments. Of course, words are very important. One thinks with the words. Of course, populism in its different shades and shapes has proven to be a very emotional appeal. But what matters in the end of the day is us thinking about a project that can bring equality, that can bring respect, that can bring the dignity, and that can become the majoritarian project, so that what used to be the fringe of politics and now became mainstream can actually be attacked at its core, not because of what it is, but because we can do better and we can bring social progress that is egalitarian, that brings emancipation and is accessible for everyone.
Thank you very much, Anja, for those concluding words. A big thanks once again on behalf of FEPS, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, and our partners of this project, Policy Solutions and Fondazione Gramsci, for having joined us online on this webinar, our speakers that are here with us. And I would also like to invite for us to also continue our work on a positive note, for our speakers to turn on their camera for the family picture and give a big smile, because we as progressives, we will provide the answer. So cheese. Thank you. I think this would be sufficient. Thank you again once more for your participation, for your engagement, and please stay in touch with FEPS. Have a nice afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.